Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming into our webinar here, slowly but surely. We're going to give everyone just a few minutes to jump in before we dive into the conversation. Hopefully, my lo-fi will soothe everyone as everyone starts to join. Really excited to talk about this. I just keep hearing so much about cannabis beverages all across the industry. Thanks for everyone's patience as we just give it a couple more minutes. Yes, love seeing those heart and thumbs up reactions. Yay.
That's only.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, everyone's awake today. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and kick things off.
Right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our 28th episode of When Things Go Wrong. I can't believe I was still surprised that we're in the double digits, but 28, it's amazing. I am so excited to have you all here. We have a packed house. We almost broke our Zoom webinar feature with a number of registrations. We're well into the 200s. This is fantastic. And excited to jump in here. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. This episode is being recorded, as is all of our previous educational webinars. So it'll be available both on our website, gmpcollective.com, pretty straightforward, and our YouTube channel. If you have questions that come up, we've got amazing experts to put on the hot seat. Bring your questions. Use the Q&A feature. You can ask them anonymously if you so choose. We also got a great amount of audience questions beforehand, so we will do our best to get through them all. If we don't, we will follow up and track Diana and Ben down in between all their speaking engagements and travels and development of amazing safe beverages, cannabinoid beverages, to get some answers over your way. This webinar will be 1 hour, which we're now down to 55 minutes. So we're going to try to get as many of the questions answered as possible. And with that, let me hand it over to our amazing host and my colleague at the GMP Collective, Bethany Moore.
Hello, thank you, David, and welcome everyone. Happy to be moderating this episode of When Things Go Wrong, where we're here to discuss various challenges and issues within the cannabis industry. I'm the Director of Content Marketing and Content Strategy and Market Growth. Sorry, strike that, reverse it, here at the GMP Collective. And we offer technical and strategic advising for cannabis and hemp product manufacturers, trade associations, and regulatory agencies. And our team of expert consultants offer decades worth of experience providing operational solutions that increase ROI and mitigate risk. So you can learn more about how we can support your business by reaching out to us today. And let's get started. Happy New Year. It's 2025. It's the year of the snake. Very exciting. And you all know David Vaillencourt, CEO of the GMP Collective, co-founder of the S3 Collective, and vice chair of ASTM International Committee D37 on Cannabis. And David's just wrapping up another in-person committee week with that fine group of folks. And today we have two great guests to talk about cannabis beverages. Diana Eberlein has 15 plus years of experience, including 8 plus in the cannabis industry, and a passion for infused beverages to her work at Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives, or CABA. She's spoken on cannabis beverage related topics at South by Southwest, Adweek New York, BevNet Live, Benzinga, Texas Package Store Association Annual Conference, National Conference State Liquor Administrator Conference, and more. Diana was also featured in Marijuana Ventures 40 Under 40 in 2023 and Benzinga's Top 20 Most Influential Women in Cannabis in 2024. Last year in 2024, she was chosen to create a new federal coalition called the Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives, focused on farm bill initiatives and educating policymakers and legislators to influence future infused beverage regulation, particularly low dose THC beverages to be regulated by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. And also we have Benjamin Larson. He's the CEO of Vertosa, the cannabis and hemp infusion technology company that creates industry-leading active ingredients and services for infused cannabis products across all legal markets. Previously, Mr. Larson co-founded Gateway Incubator, California's first business accelerator and co-working space dedicated to the emerging cannabis industry. He's also the recipient of Attach's Beverage Executive of the Year 2022 and recognized by Forbes in 2022 and 2023 as one of the 42 pioneers to watch in the green rush. He's currently a board member and vice chair of the National Cannabis Industry Association and a founding board member of the Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives. Thank you both again for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's start by talking about some industry trends, maybe what you see as the biggest trends shaping the cannabis beverage market in this coming year and beyond. And also let's talk about how cannabis and hemp beverages compare to other product categories in terms of consumer adoption and market growth. Diana, would you kick us off, please?
Sure. And there's a lot to actually unpack there because the difference between the cannabis beverages you see in the dispensary channel and the typically lower dose hemp beverages you see outside of the dispensary channel, they've got different consumer bases. They have very different dosages. So there's actually a lot more to unpack there. On the cannabis regulated, dispensary channel side, you see high dose products typically moving off the shelves, 100 milligram, 12-ounce beverages, as well as 100 milligram plus 2-ounce shots. Definitely a different consumer than what we see on the hemp beverage side, which while still using THC and still intoxicating, you're seeing generally a range between 2 and 10 milligrams per serving in those products, whether that's a 12-ounce can. In some markets, they allow 2-ounce shots. And in some markets, you see those multi-serving spirit-like products as well that are promoting a serving size of generally up to 5 or 10 milligrams per serving, but might have 100 or 150 milligrams per package. The difference really is those cannabis beverages that are high dose are going after a very experienced consumer. That is someone who knows that what they're doing, also knows their tolerance and what they can consume safely and have the desired experience they'd like. With the low dose beverages, we're often targeting a consumer that is new to cannabis or maybe returning to cannabis. They might not identify as a cannabis consumer. This might be someone who's really an adult beverage consumer and is trying an alternative, and this might be their first time having THC. So this is a very different market that we've been appealing to over the last couple of years and where we've seen a majority of the growth in terms of volume. And obviously with hemp opens up some different avenues. The shipping across state lines, and you see direct to consumer in some markets. So there's a lot of variety on the hemp side, whereas if you go into a dispensary, sometimes you see 10 brands. At least in Washington State, where I used to be, there were between 5 and 10 brands, handful of SKUs per. Right now, we're hearing that, Specs in Texas has evaluated over 400 brands. That's a vast difference between, when you think of the leaders in the cannabis beverage side. So there's, a vast difference between the two, even though it's a similar experience. The onset time is going to be between 10 and 20 minutes. The offset time should be between 60 and 90 minutes. This is a very approachable format for someone who's new to cannabis. So we look at this as oftentimes, an approachable way for someone to be introduced to cannabis, and perhaps in the future they do go to a dispensary and try other methods of consumption once they kind of understand their tolerance and learn more about the plant.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that and jump into some of the numbers, we're just talking about two extremely different marketplaces, right? And often heard that beverages
only account for 1 to 2% of cannabis sales in the regulated markets. Whereas in these emerging markets like Minnesota and Texas, we're talking to retailers, alcohol retailers, where they're anticipating that these THC products can achieve 10 to 20% of alcohol sales. So orders of magnitude different. It's almost hard to fathom. And just to pull out one specific example, we were traveling in South Carolina, meeting with a large distributor down there. They do about an average of $500 million in revenue every year. That's one state distributor. And they were expecting 10 to 20% of their sales being these THC products. So this is causing a big draw for the mainstream operators to get into the space, and a lot of the impetus for creating Kaba is the desire to make sure that we actually create these pathways in a very regulated format. Big sophisticated operators coming in increases the quality of our supply chain, our life as an ingredient manufacturer, being able to work with large operations that have done massive manufacturing runs for the biggest brands. It just really creates a different level of sophistication and conversation. And so I think that's the next big trend that we're seeing is larger and larger, well-known operators, be it distributors, manufacturers, brands, or even people that were formerly with these large brands starting companies, getting involved. And so, yeah, it's a really exciting time that I think 2025 is going to be a big year where you're going to be surprised by some of the names that you hear joining the cause.
Yeah, and to piggyback off what Ben is saying, a big portion of the growth of the low dose hemp category is not only that it is outside of the dispensary channel and more accessible than some other products, but their target consumer is different. Again, it's not that traditional cannabis consumer. Typically, people who want the experience of smoking or something at a higher dose, these products really aren't for them. So it's really appealing to a new untapped demographic that typically isn't walking into a dispensary. Do I think that it will increase the demand for other ingestibles and other methods of consumption? Yes, I think it will impact that. But the reason for the growth is really, what we always said, the elusive soccer mom didn't really exist in the dispensary channel because that's not where they were going to buy their other adult beverages. They were going to the liquor store, they were going to the grocery store where that's permitted. And now these products, in the lower dose end are accessible and right next to their alcohol counterparts, which is, I think, really where we're seeing the big drive. Low dose beverage was 0.3%. 0.3% seems to be a number that will always stick out for all of us, apparently. It was 0.3% of the regulated market. That's nothing. I used to joke that the dispensaries would hand deliver the low dose beverages to Total Wine to get them out of their hair because they were low margin, they didn't sell very well, and they took up a ton of space. The high dose products sell well there, and they belong in a position where an experienced consumer is going to have access to them. We have to remember with THC, particularly in beverage where we're hitting a new demographic, this is not someone who's particularly experienced with cannabis or THC or the intoxicating effects of THC. We have one shot at a good first impression and letting people get more comfortable with this as an active ingredient. They're very familiar with alcohol. This is very different. And as we all know, your tolerance for alcohol has nothing to do with your tolerance for THC. So there's a learning curve right now. So this is our chance to make a good first impression, have the new consumer have safe experiences with lower dose products that are available. And then, as they learn their tolerance, like you do with alcohol, then they can decide if they need higher dose products and, enter the dispensary channel where they're going to be more comfortable, know the questions to ask. They're going to be more confident with that experience in general.
Well, yeah, that's great insight. Yeah, there's one large liquor store about 15 minutes away from me that is selling CBD beverages in its own particular area of the store, but still just right there in the front. So it's interesting to see these start to come into the market. And also just a reminder to our audience to go ahead and use that Q&A feature, and the person who asked if we could add North America to the end of Kaba so that we can call it Cabana. I You're adorable. Thank you for that.
I think I know who that is.
I was going to say, that's not the first time I've heard that, actually. I think I know who it is too.
That was cute. Thank you for that. All right, let's keep moving along. As far as product development, what are the unique challenges that we face in formulating cannabis beverages compared to edibles or topicals, fast-acting products, and talking about maybe some of the early beverage formulations from a few years ago and some changes there. Diana,
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll start with it. You know, the formulation is not that challenging. It's just that it requires an understanding that every product is unique. You know, every time you put a bunch of ingredients into a liquid matrix, like you have to ensure that there's compatibility amongst those ingredients. You know, how those ingredients are formulated within themselves may be different, and how they interact with each other may change. We generally accelerate through that process pretty quickly these days. Where we hit roadblocks most often is in the downstream manufacturing of those products and the packaging of which they're going into. And so we as a company have actually now started doing, you know, facility audits, supplier audits, and this kind of things to really help ensure that, you know, soup to nuts, that we're getting a product that is going to hold its potency on the shelf and deliver the experience that the consumer is expecting. And so some of those things that you might run into, manufacturing, for instance, there are many different types of manufacturing scale, equipment, speed, you know, what have you. And so what you want to do is make sure that the process is going through, you know, something that is going to deliver something that has controls on it. And largely I'm speaking to mostly oxygen control. You know, anyone from the beer industry largely understands that the amount of oxygen you introduce throughout the manufacturing process is going to interact with those ingredients. Not just the THC, which can oxidize, but also the flavors. You know, your flavors can change if you introduce too much oxygen. And so you really want to make sure that that is under control. And then when it goes into the packaging, can liners and how they interact with emulsions in general is something that you have to watch very carefully. You know, we've done a separate webinar on this in particular. And again, it's not just cannabis emulsions, flavors. You know, I think there's this study going on in Europe right now where a particular can liner is being sunset, a new can liner introduced, and you know, the response from a flavor company is just be like, oh, we'll add more flavor, it'll balance out eventually. That's harder to do when you're talking about active ingredients where 1 milligram can make a difference. And so, you know, that is generally where the challenges with formulation come in. What I'm excited about is the opportunities with formulation and the different cannabinoids and terpenes and experiences that you can create with these products. We're seeing more people drive towards creating full spectrum products where you get to leverage the whole power of the plant. And I'm excited to kind of see how the market receives those. You know, as we've talked about earlier, the consumer is a little bit different. You know, there's maybe not as many consumers that are looking for products that are true to the plant, so to speak. You know, a lot of the products on the market have hidden the plant and, you know, deliver the experience without the flavor. But we might see a craft market emerge where people are looking for something a little bit more plant-centric.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, I think there's a lot of consumers, I mean, like myself, I've really come to appreciate it when I can get the cannabis notes alongside it within a beverage. But we have such a new consumer base. A lot of them don't want to taste it. I mean, let's face it, most people don't want to taste the alcohol in their cocktails. So, you know, it makes sense that they might not want that experience, especially when they're new to the plant. The other thing is they might not understand all the other cannabinoids. Right now, we kind of are in a position where we need to keep it simple. Get used to D9, understand what D9 is, what THC is, how that interacts. There's still a lack of data in terms of how the other cannabinoids and other active ingredients, including something like caffeine, interact with THC. And those are going to be things that we need to push for and acquire and create over time to not only make regulatory bodies comfortable with this active ingredient interacting with others, but for the consumer to have a safe experience at the end of the day as well. And one thing that I will say, I mean, emulsion technology isn't new to beverage. Emulsion technology was designed for beverage. Every category within beverage is using some form of emulsion technology. cannabis and the oil extract has proven to be a trickier active ingredient than many other plant-sourced ingredients that are, integrated into beverage. Vertosa, Source, a number of leading emulsion providers have been able to create solutions that do create shelf-stable products that can really create consumer trust, as well as trust for a retailer and a distributor that's new to this category. I know, Vertosa and Source, we're educating labs on how to test accurately. When you're creating a technology that is designed to trick your body into absorbing it like water, you've got to test accordingly, because it's literally supposed to disguise it so that you don't see the oil. So there were certain things that early on, going back 5, 6, 7 years in the earlier days of beverage, we had to do a lot of education there to make sure that that first sip had the same dose as the last. Because what you don't want, and this is where we get a lot of questions, is, am I going to take a sip of that beverage and get that whole 10 milligrams at once? Or am I going to get it at the very end? And realistically, with the emulsion technology available today, with a supplier that has proven history, and they should have data to back that up, proven history, you shouldn't have to worry about an inconsistent experience. The beverages available today, working with established partners, should be able to document that they are able to deliver a consistent experience time and time again, and show you the testing that shows that it's a stable emulsion within the product. We hear a lot about scalping, which Ben kind of touched on. Scalping is also not new to beverage. We have done, and I know Vertosa and Source, and again, the leading emulsion providers, did a lot of tests with can liners to understand, so that they could make the right recommendation to customers producing beverages. So we've alleviated a lot of those early concerns about beverage delivering a consistent experience. And the reality is we need to, because alcohol does not deliver an inconsistent experience. And that's what a lot of our target consumer with low dose hemp is expecting. Something of the same sort of experience, where they don't have to worry about that one hitting so much harder than the last one they had. This is consistent, and we're striving to continue to put sensible regulation in place that, again, protects the consumer, so that they can build that trust with this category.
I can jump in. This is super fascinating, and I usually have a lot to say, but I have more questions than anything, and I so appreciate learning from you guys. I want to throw in a question that came from the audience that I also have around, you mentioned shelf stable, and so what does that mean? What are you guys seeing in terms of, shelf stability, and do you have any, have you seen any kind of like best practices or guidance as to where suitable shelf life and stability testing is currently in the marketplace?
It's a great question. And truthfully, because of the nature of the hemp market, there's you have a wide spectrum, so to speak, of what you might see on shelves. And so I'm always surprised, like you go from the regulated space where it's really easy to wrap your arms around all the operators, all the brands, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves in this reality where I travel to a new state and I'll see 20 brands that I've never even heard of. And so due to the lack of guardrails, there is certainly the opportunity for less scrutiny to be applied to certain products. However, what I will say is that our standard and what we know we can shoot for is 12 months shelf life stability. And we've proven it, time and time again with a number of brands. And so we're starting to offer that as a service, knowing that, maybe the requirement won't be 12 months. In certain states like Michigan, where there's been very high bars of entry, it's like maybe 6 months is good enough. And maybe there's like some sort of reasonable regulations that can be put in place. But if you do it right, you have the right packaging, you have the right manufacturing, you can deliver a totally stable low dose beverage. And I think that's what we need to drive for. That's why we've created CABA, is to really help educate on that front.
And for most traditional beverages, they don't typically want those beverages staying on a shelf at a store for over 3 months max. Yeah. So, our industry, again, we're always trying to overcorrect to build that trust, because we're coming out of prohibition and there's so many questions. And again, our target consumer with low dose hemp beverages is very new to this space in general. So 12-month stability is great. It shouldn't necessarily be what you need to still have a good product. And I don't mean to say that you shouldn't be striving for the longest shelf life possible. It's just typically these products are moving more quickly than that, and people shouldn't be buying them and putting them on a shelf for a year in their pantry. So in general, if there are brands that aren't hitting that 12-month stability, maybe they're at 6, maybe they use a puree or a different ingredient that might impact that shelf stability. It doesn't mean they're a lower quality product. It might just be the different factors that impact that. And again, the reality should be expected that a consumer will consume this within 3 months.
Yeah. The exciting thing is that, you know, the category used to be so small, and we can only control so much. You know, we mentioned can liners a lot, right? We don't have any control over how those can liners are manufactured or like who's distributing them. But what is nice is that the category has so much traction now, and there's so many people getting involved that people are starting to pay attention and they're starting to ask more questions, and we're be able to start make more demands from some of these role players out on the periphery of the category. So as time goes on, our handles on these controls are going to become more robust.
Great, thank you both. David, did you want to add anything before moving on? Okay, great. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the marketing and consumer education side of all this a bit more. You know, I'm a fan of other non-alcoholic beverages out there. There's this one brand, Curious Elixirs. They have all these adaptogens like ashwagandha, Damiana, rhodiola, really cool. And I compare the cannabis beverage world sort of moving in that direction, especially with the mention of all these other cannabinoids that the consumers aren't as aware of as those who are inside the cannabis industry. So for marketing these cannabis beverages to the new consumers as well as the experienced consumers, you know, is it similar to edibles for those who don't smoke or vape? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. You know, when it comes to education, I think one of the biggest things we have to educate on is the different experience compared to other edibles, because a lot of people just assume all edibles and all ingestibles must have the same experience. With beverage, because of the emulsion technology, which is essentially tricking your body into absorbing the active ingredient earlier through the intestinal tract, you're going to have a more consistent onset and offset that is much more sessionable and similar to alcohol. So the comparisons often made are to an alcoholic beverage versus other cannabis products per se. And again, it's not a one-to-one. Like I said, the tolerance spectrum for THC is much wider than with alcohol. You can kind of predict what will make the average person intoxicated when you're talking about alcohol. It's very different with THC, and the tolerances range so wide. What we focus on is, again, introducing this new consumer to this category. It's start low and go slow. You know, start with a 2 or 3 milligram beverage, see how you feel after 10 to 20 minutes. After that 20 minutes, after you've consumed that entire dose, you should know whether or not you can consume another one. But just like alcohol, if you consume a lot of THC in one shot, it's going to last longer and you're going to feel more intoxicated, and you might have that. And again, it's not really a hangover feeling, but you might, you know, feel high 3 hours later versus that 60 to 90 minutes, which is with a sessionable low dose product. Most new consumers on average consume between 10 to 15 milligrams of THC in a typical drinking session. So that's, you know, 2 to 3 hours of having a few beverages. I'm a low dose girly. I consume these beverages regularly. 2.5 is my sweet spot. If I have a 5, I'm usually trying to cut it with like a, you know, sparkling ice or something like that so that I can make it last longer. Because I love these beverages, but I can only consume so much. And that is part of the learning curve and the trial and error, which with alcohol is very socially acceptable. Go away to college and learn your alcohol tolerance, and that, you know, you'll figure it out, sometimes the hard way. We don't really have that luxury because there is a lack of trust about these products because of the fact we're coming out of prohibition. So we try to be very proactive with our education. We also really try to not put down alcohol. I think that's a really crucial point. First of all, we're trying to play in their sandbox. We want these products to be on the shelf next to them, obviously labeled as THC beverages very clearly, but we want to be using their infrastructure for distribution and retail and things like that. A lot of our partners, a majority of their revenue is still coming from alcohol. So we really try to not, you know, market against those, but also this isn't an either or. I still love my wine. We've joked about this in the past. I think if you go to the cannabis conferences, the lobby bar is doing just fine. You know, It's not an either or. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that we are just another alternative and we don't need to put down another category to market our product. On the same token, we also don't like the verbiage, and it varies depending on who you talk to. But typically we don't like the verbiage of no hangover. And yes, you're not going to have those same effects or symptoms as a hangover per se, but a negative experience is a negative experience. And no hangover encourages overconsumption. It might make the new novice consumer think, oh, well, then why can't I have 50 milligrams if I can't have a hangover? They don't necessarily know what the other side effects would be, which again could be spiked anxiety. I drink a lot of these beverages because they mitigate my anxiety and stress. So to have the opposite effect for me would be devastating and would make me not want to consume this product, even though it's something that has really provided a great solution for me. So we want to be transparent. Again, we're trying to earn trust. And the way to do that is through accurate education, but also full transparency as to what our active ingredient can do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Additionally, like there's what you can educate the community with, and then there's what you can do structurally to allow the community to educate themselves, which is frankly how a lot of us learned about alcohol, right? One of the more controversial topics earlier on, less so now, and when I say earlier on, I mean like 6 months ago, is like the concept of dose caps and really coming in and being like, this is as potent as we should go in the open marketplace. Like this is our opportunity to introduce the broader THC, cannabinoid, hemp, cannabis, category to the broad consumer. And so if we give them something that's measurable and stackable, dosable, then they can learn what works for themselves. And so this is why like the dose caps that we're promoting in our language with Kaba is so important. My dream of the future, right, is that people may choose to leverage a certain cannabinoid like THCV or like CBG in a similar way that Red Bull did with taurine or Reign did with branched chain amino acids, BCAAs. It's like, are those ingredients really that sexy? No, but like they did something with them and it made it part of their brand. But really, it is about the brand and the experience. And as a formulator of cannabinoids for these products, my dream is actually to like de-emphasize the cannabinoids themselves and more dial in the experience that product wants to deliver. And for someone to be able to pick up that can and get the experience that they're expecting, like time and time again, like that's where the real like deep level of education marketing is going to be able to come from, is like being able to deliver on those unique experiences.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
to your point, Ben, it's setting expectations and setting them appropriately. And I am so excited for when we get to the point where we have more intentional beverage, where there's an actual desired effect and use case that they're using to market that product. And, to Ben's point, yes, it might be because of THCV or CBG or something else that's been added to that ingredient, but it almost doesn't need to be that technical. It could just be, hey, I want to relax, and this beverage has advertised or marketed that lifestyle, and that's where I'm going to go with this. So I think there's a lot of room for, expansion in the future, and it's part of why the Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives was named the way it was. It's not just about THC. We might be advocating and lobbying for other active ingredients in the future to be working with the plant. It gives us some flexibility for the future.
Yeah, definitely makes me think about a few different scenarios, in the future, going to a brewery and having these types of beverages on tap or available. There is a difference between, oh, I'm going to have a drink to relax and I'm going to have a drink that's going to make me sleepy. Uh-oh, why am I out of my house? Also, just thinking about this shelf stableness and how it's served, and then the availability in retail cannabis dispensaries, shelf stable versus having them available refrigerated in the dispensary too. That's a little bit of a merchandising hurdle, would you say?
Yeah, it was always kind of a hurdle in the dispensary channel. I mean, again, the dispensaries are limited on how much room they have, and to add a refrigerator for a product that takes up a lot of space with thinner margin than flour or wax or some of the other products they have there, it wasn't necessarily desirable. A lot of brands that were putting dollars behind their advertising and co-marketing with that dispensary would bring in their own refrigerator and make it appealing to that retailer to focus on beverage. And you know, beverage in the dispensary channel has continued to grow over the years. When I was at Source, their largest customers were still in the dispensary channel just by volume, because it was 100 milligram beverages and, 1,000 milligram tinctures and things like that were, really selling in the dispensaries. But, merchandising was always a hurdle there, especially when most people don't think of beverage when they think of cannabis. That's not the first consumption method that comes to mind. And as a result, you don't get a lot of people coming and asking questions, which is why the education was always also a hurdle. I always, this is years ago, so I'm sure it's gotten better now, but I walked into a dispensary and I asked the question, why would I want a beverage instead of a gummy? The answer I got was, well, one's a liquid. And I was a little concerned that he didn't think I knew that. I was a little concerned about what vibe I was giving off. That was the answer. But it just goes to show that because it wasn't coming up as frequently, they weren't prepared to answer those questions. If I had asked a question about one of the vape pens or the vape cartridge, I would have gotten a very thorough answer. And it's just because of who was coming in and who was familiar with those products already. The onset time and the offset time would have been a really nice differentiator between the gummy and the drink, but the liquid was where he decided to focus. So it's those are things that drastically need to change within the dispensary channel. But at the same time, if we're able to educate on the low dose, hemp THC beverages, and it becomes more normalized that this is the experience you get from beverage, that kind of takes care of the education and the lack of education that might be happening in the dispensary, because that consumer is going to learn that from the more normalized public crowd, and then be able to take that into the dispensary and again feel more confident when they're buying those higher dose products. But yeah, a lot of hurdles on the dispensary side when it came to merchandising. And again, whether or not it was going to be a priority for that particular retailer really often was dependent on what sort of co-marketing was going to be done to drive foot traffic into that store.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out that some of the more sophisticated retailers on the low dose hemp side are committing themselves to educating their entire teams so that they can educate the consumers. And we love that and are providing them materials to do so. But yeah, Steve Jabor from Specs is on our board. I know he's worked closely with all of his team members to make sure they know the talking points and how to set consumers up for success. So yeah, I think it's just every effort that we can make, every person that we can arm with this information is helping spread the word.
There are some new programs that have emerged over time. The Aficionado program is a non-alc and a alcohol-free platform that does education for essentially no alcohol beer, NA beer, wine, and they added a certification for cannabis beverage, which educates. It's really designed to be kind of like the Cicerone project or Cicerone program for beer, where it's for hospitality groups and retailers to set up this certification program for their team so that they can learn about this category and be most equipped to help that consumer when they ask a question about that beverage at the bar, or when they ask about that question to Kyle in aisle 7. We need those people to be able to answer basic questions, as well as maybe some that are a little bit more advanced, because again, we're targeting a brand new consumer and we can't be everywhere at once. So we've taken it at the coalition an approach of educating the retailers and distributors on how to evaluate these products so that we can make sure the good actors, if you will. And to be fair, I think we have a majority of the brands out there, because let's face it, no one just has a bottling line in their garage. We're dealing with brewers manufacturing these beverages. We're dealing with true beverage professionals at scale now. these products are of higher quality than I think people initially gave them credit for. As a result, they're very consistent. And, you know, now when we're at retail, we need to make sure that we're educating that. So when we go to the retailer and distributor, we do these programs once a month where we give a deep dive on the category, what they need to know, how to evaluate these products. Because if they don't carry bad products on their shelves, the consumer doesn't have access to them. And that's how right now, without consistent regulation, we can protect the consumer proactively.
So appreciate that. All right, we're getting up to about 15 to 20 minutes left of our webinar here, and we are rocking and rolling. Let's talk briefly about some supply chain of custody, as well as collaboration and partnerships that bring this product together. Are there any examples of successful collaborations that have overcome some industry challenges, and the importance of partnerships when it comes to scaling these brands, and how do we see breweries getting involved in the future? Ben, you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, partnerships have been a huge cornerstone to a lot of the work that we've done over the years. You know, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our incredible network of partners. You know, we all come together to really ensure that we're just advancing the science as quickly as possible. It's funny, you know, we did partner with a fairly well-known flavor house called Doler, and we thought it was going to be this huge opportunity to kind of level up our R&D, which it is. They're great, but we've also learned a lot just by the nature of the business and the level of investigations we've done, and so. Testing labs have been huge partners to ours to continually do like these R&D cycles and to refine the SOPs as far as testing beverages, which was a unique proposition not that long ago. Working with the can printers and can liner manufacturers to ensure that we are setting up secure and robust supply chains. You know, we have run into certain instances where someone thought they were manufacturing with a certain can and can liner, and suddenly we test it and it's not. So that's problematic. And then, yeah, the co-packing partners that we have, the breweries have been amazing. Surly Brewing up in Minnesota has been a phenomenal partner, really kind of opened our eyes to what it was like to work with breweries. And so we quickly turned that relationship and went and found as many breweries as we could just to kind of educate them on the industry. And they've been excited just because of the opportunity to have something to backfill some of the softening sales on the beer side. Other than that, for us specifically is kind of who we supply from, ingredients. You know, we were a little bit hesitant to get into this hemp side of the business because we were born out of the regulated cannabis space. And with regulated cannabis, you know, it has its own host of issues, I'll admit, but it very tightly regulated. You know who you're working with, and you know the sophistication of their operation. And with the kind of wide open market that hemp presented, we had to work with, again, testing labs and suppliers to truly understand the quality of the inputs that we were using. And so, you know, when it says naturally derived, is it truly naturally derived? How far back can we trace that chain of custody? And can we have attestations all the way through to ensure that this is truly a naturally derived, naturally extracted product? You know, if it is converted, which is not just THC or Delta 8. I mean, we talk about conversion with THCV, CBC, you know, CBN. It's like, how clean are those conversion processes? Are we making sure that we're pulling out all the catalysts and all the acids? And in order to do that, you need to have people that are really dedicated to the process. And so, you know, when we were first getting in, we took our identification of who our supply chain partners were very seriously. And the ones that were willing to open up the book, so to speak, and be very transparent is kind of how we ended up where we did. And we had actually had to develop some new testing protocols that weren't even required in the regulated space.
Yeah, one thing that I don't think some people probably realize from the outside looking in, a lot of these brands have to provide double the amount of documentation and testing that an alcohol brand would.
Mhm.
Again, we're building trust. We're in this new category. Retailers and distributors, they've got licenses for the alcohol space at a federal level. They don't want to do anything to jeopardize those things, so they're being extra cautious. So supply chain of custody, working with your partners, if your partner isn't willing to talk to your distributor or retailer to help you get and secure those relationships, that's not really common in this space. Most people here are collaborating. It won't always be that way. Pepsi and Coca-Cola don't get in a room and go, you know what you should do? It would be really great. We're in this space right now where we are sharing who our co-packers are. We are sharing who our ingredient suppliers are. We're sharing who was able to create and supply us with chain of custody that was able to help us get, access into specs or Total Wine and more. It's a very supportive community, very reminiscent of for those in the craft brew space. They have a lot of that. And it's important because the only way we're going to be able to build that trust is if every part of that supply chain is willing to share and be transparent. And transparency is really the key, because to Ben's point about the converted materials, if we don't know what that process looks like, we don't know what to test for in terms of, are those byproducts and the other materials in that solution, are they safe? If we don't have full transparency, we not only can't test, but that isn't something that would ever fly in a traditional CPG market. The FDA is not going to say, okay, that's fine, it's IP. That's not how that works. So if a brand is not willing to be transparent, or their supplier isn't really willing to be transparent about their process and what's in that ingredient, that's a red flag. And they're not planning to be around when this is regulated. And so like we share that information because we want the best in this space, because it takes one mistake to set not just beverage back, everyone on the hemp side back.
Yeah.
And frankly, cannabis, because again, we're just trying to build some trust.
Yeah.
I'm going to insert one word of caution, is that all the scrutiny that you put with your cannabis and hemp ingredients, also consider putting with your non-cannabis and hemp ingredients, because we have had heavy metal and pesticide hits on non-cannabis ingredients, and it's just it's like, oh, I didn't see that one coming. So your organic products especially, make sure you're getting them tested if you're having to pass these highly scrutinous tests.
Great advice. And that's a great segue for the next topic I want to get into about regulation and the role that GMPs, our favorite subject, and ASTM standards. Maybe David has some fresh perspective from committee week, and the role that GMPs and ASTM standards play in the production of these beverages, and how are the state and federal regulations evolving, and how are they impacting this particular product space's ability to innovate. I mean, regulators, they're barely just getting their arms wrapped around the flower, the pre-rolls, the vapes, the edibles, and now beverage enters the chat. So
Fortunately,
where are we at there?
Fortunately, beverage is something they're generally more familiar with, because the manufacturing best practices are used to create other functional beverages, are used in alcohol. And we're trying to mimic that, because again, that's the infrastructure that we want to be regulated by in the future. Everyone always thinks like, oh, well, cannabis and hemp are different. It's like, we're trying to be treated like we're not different. We're an adult beverage with an intoxicant in it. And yes, we need, we need the same testing, and we want to make sure our quality is there. We might have some nuances because we are using a new active ingredient, but essentially the GMP certifications that we want, we're really following all of the guidelines. The one thing we don't have is GRAS status. And that's because no cannabinoid has been given GRAS status. So aside from that, we're really trying to follow the best practices and standards that have been used in beverage and over the last few decades. So we're not doing anything incredibly different from the manufacturing and probably production standpoint. What we are trying to get access to, and this is where, from a regulatory standpoint, we need some support, and why we've partnered at the coalition with a number of alcohol partners. We want access to their distribution channels. No one wants these products in the hands of children. We want to, again, make a safe introduction of this active ingredient to this new target consumer. Dosage caps are obviously a top concern. Also, if you're, selling these products in a market where there's a marijuana channel, you're going to have some of that, wait, that's our territory. With beverage, we've been a little bit more united because low-dose beverage didn't perform well on the dispensary channel. So carving low-dose out and saying, hey, let this go through mainstream beverage distribution channels. Again, three-tier system's not perfect. But if we had to recreate an infrastructure similar to it, it's not going to be done nearly as well. It's going to have its own problems, and it's going to take forever for us to build it. Meanwhile, they have the infrastructure and they target the same target consumer we are with those low dose products. So, we're looking to get support and getting access to that mainstream distribution and retail channel that adult beverages with alcohol already have.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of like isolated conversations coming up in these different markets as hemp and cannabis come closer together. And to address Scott Wessler's question, I see there's an interesting opportunity for cannabis regulators and alcohol regulators to build partnerships and kind of co-regulate these markets, because it's impossible to have ABC go back and regulate the quality of cannabinoid extracts. Like, they're just not going to do it. They don't want to do it. Just the same as it's going to be impossible for us to teach the DCC, sorry to single them out. I'm California, but a cannabis regulator on, truly understanding the beverage manufacturing process. It's complex. It's centuries old at this point. So it's like, why don't we bring these organizations together and realize that there's a handoff point? And I think that largely happens at the ingredient / manufacturing level. It's like you grace the quality of said ingredients, they get handed off, and there's an off ramp into the alcohol distribution channel. That's what I would like to hope to see. That is not official language from CABA. That is merely my prognostication.
That's fair. David, did you have any thoughts on the GMPs and ASTMs for beverages?
I'll just add, to that point, I think, you mentioned Surly, my days living in Minnesota for a few years, amazing brewery up there. And, that's what gets me excited is seeing that the beverage producers, they've been making beverages for, years, decades in many cases. So making safe, consistent products, this is just another ingredient. And Ben, as you, called it out well, don't forget to audit your supply chain and qualify your supply chain in all raw ingredients, not just the THC isolate or distillate or spectrum, the emulsifiers, surfactants, etc., but the entire product, liners, you name it, all the raw materials and ingredients. And that's a GMP best practice, as well as, cleaning, sanitation, training and education. I see a big opportunity. So ASTM committee week here, as I sit in my hotel room down in Texas, where we met this week, I checked out a couple of, THC products are everywhere, Farm Bill quote compliant products. And at this one place that I checked out yesterday after our committee week, there was use of products with on the labels, like label issues. So no universal symbol that I'm familiar with, which is the ASTM universal symbol that was approved several years ago and is now in over 7 states. But there is a Colorado universal symbol. There was a California. There was an Oregon one. There was a made up one. And some of them are so small that the consumer can't even see it. And so disclosures and transparency, truth in labeling is going to be so critical. That gives me hope with CABA's, your formation to drive that and to expect that all actors would be playing by these minimum terms of engagement. And that's where there's a big opportunity to see CABA show up through the ASTM process to be able to engage like 90 other industries have over 125 years to take these best practices, whether it's, dosing limits, serving sizes, are you able to use, derived products, synthetic cannabinoids, et cetera? What does that even mean to get that nomenclature out so that we have consistency and transparency in what consumers are actually consuming at the end of the day? So there's a real great opportunity to engage with the public health experts and regulators to get those standards established and then put out there in the marketplace for federal adoption.
And I will tell you,
Mhm.
our code of conduct, we do call out the ASTM universal symbol. That's the one we recommend. We've also, spoken with Pamela Epstein, who obviously was there as well. She's got her total intoxicating cannabinoid content program that she's been pushing. Those are all things that we are proactively trying to get behind and support, because we do need a THC version of ABV. The consumer understands that. And that's what we're trying to create, is what is familiar to the consumer that continues to make this category more approachable than it already is.
Yeah, and where tick is super important is, like, I've been in gas stations in South Carolina and North Carolina, and you see all these cannabinoids that I don't, I'm in the industry, I don't even know what they do or how strong they are. And so, like, understanding, just a raw singular number that will tell you essentially how intoxicated you can potentially get.
Mm-hmm. We have just 2, 3 minutes left here. Kind of the last few questions here have to do with our future outlook, maybe technological advancements in production or consumer preference evolution. Any thoughts on either of those topics?
I mean, consumer evolution, over time, as this gets normalized, we talked a lot about the intentional beverage and function, really making these functional beverages and not just about the THC aspect. But I do think right now we are in an introductory phase. People are exploring this. They're getting familiar with what THC beverages are, understanding their dosage and their tolerance. We're very much in an exploratory introductory phase. We are starting to see people get into more back to full flavor, not just 0-calorie light diet beverages. Although I always like to say I don't like to drink my calories, but I'll tell you, there's some really good beverages out there that are 30 calories and under, very minimal sugar. And you really don't, with the emulsion technology available today, you don't need a lot of sugar to cover 5 or 10 milligrams in a beverage. So most of these beverages should taste very good because of that. The active ingredient should not have a strong smell or anything like that. So for a new consumer coming in, this is a very clean solution. I will say I saw a question about CBD drinks and if they're really gone. I think the biggest issue with CBD drinks is the expectation for the consumer wasn't quite established. I think a lot of people thought they were going to feel something, and then they didn't, because it's, it was 20 milligrams of CBD typically that you saw. It's not really enough to quote unquote feel something, but it also it's not designed to be an intoxicant.
Mhm.
And I don't think that was fully understood by the consumer at that time. I personally, because I am a low dose consumer and I love some of these drinks, I've always said that there is actually an opportunity for CBD versions of these beverages to exist to space out the consumption. I love Fable, for example. I'm a low dose person, and that is a beverage that's a little bit more artisanal. You can't just cut that with a sparkling water and have the same flavor profile. If they had a CBD version, I would alternate between the two because I really do love the flavor. But again, that might not make sense for everybody, but it's something I've thought of as I've seen the evolution of this category continue to grow. I think, though, the pricing would have to drastically change. And I think now that we have these bigger manufacturers and bigger distributors moving these products, if we get the regulatory clarity we need, that pricing could come down to where these CBD beverages don't seem like, overpriced or not delivering on what the consumer expects. So I do think there's an opportunity there.
Awesome. Thanks. Ben, as we wrap things up, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, CBD is interesting. It's a challenging market, right? It doesn't have the draw that these THC products have. Therefore, you don't have the distributors and retailers really creating space for it. But it faces a lot of the same regulatory challenges that the THC space. So, like, the FDA still hasn't provided guidance on how CBD gets incorporated into food, and therefore you don't have broad distribution. So we do work with a number of the top CBD beverage companies, and yeah, I just hear the pains of being in that market, and they're kind of stuck in purgatory, unfortunately. That being said, I going back to the marketing of the category, one of our best marketing things is us not having to do anything, just offering the products, and that's because people have really started gravitating towards this non-alc movement, right? But non-alc doesn't mean you don't want an experience, and especially if you're paying a premium for something. And so it truly is filling this void of this massive movement that is happening worldwide. and THC beverages are answering the call essentially. And I think that's why we're seeing such a large pickup. And one last thing is as we see this pickup, also as a low dose girly, I can I am surprised by how many people will go straight towards grabbing the 10 milligram beverages. It's the consumers are out there, and they don't just consume 2 milligram and 5 milligram products. And so having this diversity of product for people to purchase is important. And that's why you'll see a lot of argument about what is low and high dose.
Yeah, and I will say real quick, just talking about the future, we are going to see more standardization from a regulatory standpoint. When you're looking at these states and the bills that they're drafting, we're, in some states 6 days into their session, and they already have draft regs that they're circulating and socializing. And we're looking at, typically 5 and 10 milligram caps for beverage in particular, distribution through liquor stores or anywhere where alcohol is sold and served, which is really where we kind of belong. We're seeing that pathway being created forward at the state level. And with that consistency, I think it again normalizes, it builds trust, and we'll continue to see the growth. And again, just continue to build on that accessibility. But I think the consumer, there's an inherent trust that comes when they see a product on the shelves at Total Wine. There's something that's built with a mainstream distributor or a mainstream retailer carrying these products and recommending these products. And the consumer feels that at the end of the day. So, the more we drive that sensible regulation and, be prepared to come to the table and compromise on regulation. We're being told to meet them in the middle. We have to define what that is for a lot of regulators, because again, there's a lot of things they're trying to wrap their heads around. And I think we'll be able to get there. And I'm fairly confident that the states that are putting these programs together and continuously improving upon the regs that they've already created, it's all starting to look very familiar to us. And it's because it's something that alcohol is already built and we're able to kind of piggyback off of. But again, that is what's familiar to our target consumer, and that's the right path forward.
Awesome. All right, we're just a couple minutes over. Thanks for everyone who stuck with us past the hour. Yeah, I look forward to seeing some adaptogens of all kinds in future beverages as they all merge together. Thanks to all the attendees. Appreciate you. Thanks to Diana and Ben. A reminder, all of our past episodes can be found on our website and our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. And if you're interested in learning more about working with us, as mentioned before, we do offer strategic advising, subject matter expertise, data-driven solutions, and more designed to elevate your business's operations. Reach out to us today at thegmpcollective.com. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
It's great to have you guys. See you all soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
See you on the circuit next week, maybe.
Yeah. Go to Miami.
Yep.